On behalf of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, good afternoon to those logged in, and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Ben Lancaster, and I am the Southeast and Northeast AFI Inspector for the AFI program. During the presentation portion of the webinar, all participant microphones will be muted. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit your question using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Submitted questions and comments will be monitored by the Kansas Department of Agriculture staff. At any time during the webinar, when asking a question, please include your name, city, and facility, business or nonprofit organization, if applicable, so that we may easily answer your question. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online for all participants. As much as possible, the presentations will also be posted online. Please note that this presentation will be recorded today. It is with great pleasure we welcome Dr. Warren Hess. Dr. Hess is an Assistant Director in the AVMA's Division of Animal Health and Public Health and AVMA's Disaster Coordinator. Dr. Hess has led several state and national organizations, including serving as president of the National Alliance of Animal and Agricultural Emergency Programs. Dr. Hess was voted Veterinarian of the Year in 2014 by the UVMA. He was the recipient of the NASA AEP Service Award in 2017 and the American Veterinary Medical Foundation Paws Up Award in 2018. Let us welcome Dr. Warren Hess.
Well, I'm excited to be with you today. Let me get my screen shared here and get everything set up, and I think we can get going. All right, so I'm excited to be able to present just a few notes and suggestions that will hopefully assist you in your efforts to become a better prepared business, especially a business that deals with animals. So obviously, I've spent most of my career dealing with veterinarians and veterinary facilities, but all animal facilities have a lot of things in common. So let's look at some of the history behind issues that have happened, and some of the lessons learned that can be helpful for you. So whether you face the worst possible scenario, like you might see here in this picture, just an extended power outage that goes for a long period of time, the information that we're going to discuss today will help to prepare your business to prevent some emergencies, or to at least lessen the impact and the length of time required to get back to normal operations from others. Perhaps most importantly, this preparation will help you to lessen the stress you will experience in any event that may affect your business operations. The two photos that you've just seen are from Stubner Airline Veterinary Hospital in Spring, Texas. Hurricane Harvey hit the Houston, Texas area the evening of Friday, August 25th in 2017. And it completely inundated this veterinary hospital. It took 3 weeks before the doctors could start providing care, even in other clinics that weren't flooded. And we're going to talk here in just a minute about the importance of having a personal or a family response plan so that the length of time to getting your business back up and running won't be quite so long. The doctors were finally able to start offering vaccine clinics in November, which was over 2 months later. And they provided these vaccine clinics out of a rented trailer or like a mobile classroom that they parked in their parking lot. 3 months post-storm, they were finally able to open their boarding and grooming facilities that was associated with their clinic. but it wasn't until 4 months or a full 17 weeks post-storm that they were finally able to reopen, at least in some limited fashion, their veterinary business. So I want you to imagine what would happen if your business was out of commission for a full 4 months and what kind of impact that would have. So let's talk about the importance of being personally prepared, because if you aren't personally prepared, I can guarantee you that you're not going to be able to focus on the aspects of your business that might be impacted as well. And, you know, many disasters or incidents can involve both your business and your place where you live, so your residence. All of the information that I'm going to show you on these next few slides can be found at ready.gov. You and the rest of your team each need to have and maintain a personal or a family plan. The first step involves 5 questions to consider and further information to look into as you develop and maintain your personal or family plan. So most cities and counties and even states have an emergency alert system of some sort. Find out what notification systems exist for your area and subscribe to them. Emergency alert apps are becoming very common, and maybe the areas that you live in might be using a specific app that you could subscribe to and receive early notification of issues that are coming up. You can also subscribe to general weather apps and things like that that can alert you of weather-related events, but they don't tend to alert you to other non-weather-related events. What about your sheltering plan, your personal sheltering plan, or for your family? Where will you go, including when to shelter in place or other options that might need to be considered? What's your evacuation route? How will you get out of your house or out of town? And where will you gather, especially if all your family members or household members aren't in the same location when an incident happens? Those need to be discussed and decided so that you know where to go and look for people. How will you communicate if regular means of communications aren't working? So we're all used to relying on cell phone and texting, and during major incidents, cell phones probably aren't going to work. Texting will probably work longer than the actual calling function of your phone, but frequently lines are tied up. Networks reach their maximum capacity and you don't get any response. Occasionally calling out of town might get you connected, whereas if you're calling in the affected area, you can't get through to anybody. So sometimes having an out-of-state contact allows you to share messages with somebody who can then inform you what other messages they're getting from other household members. And then finally, what about your own emergency preparedness kit? What parts need to be updated? How often are you updating your preparedness kits? What aspects might you need to reconsider to have in there to have adequate supplies for yourself? Now, no two families are the same, just like no two businesses are the same. The next step in creating and maintaining a personal or family plan is to look at special circumstances that may need to be considered in your individual plan. So just as you should be encouraging your clients to include their animals in their personal emergency plans, each family has other unique requirements that should be considered in their plan. So look at these. Here are a few examples of things that might be specific to your individual situation. Step 3 involves actually creating or filling out the plan. So emergency plans should be disaster specific. A house fire is different than a hurricane. You need to take different disaster types into consideration when developing your personal or family plans. That's why it's plural plans. This will also be important as you develop your business plans that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. And then finally, the most important, but unfortunately, it's also the least carried out part of a plan is to practice. So if a plan not written is only a wish, as you have probably heard, then in my opinion, a written plan not practiced is only good for use as a paperweight. Practicing the plan and making changes to the plan based on the outcome of the exercise or the practice is the key to developing and maintaining an effective plan. This will also be very critical as we talk about business plans. People don't take their plans off the shelf during a disaster and read what to do because there's no time. But the knowledge and information and actions taken throughout the planning, exercise, and evaluation process of your plan will become critically important during a disaster. Many of you have probably heard one of Dwight D. Eisenhower's famous quotes, which states, "In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless," right? Because you can't anticipate every turn that's going to happen as you make plans. So the plans frequently never work out the way they're written, but the planning process is indispensable. And I can't emphasize that enough. So if you want a successful plan, then you've got to go through the planning process, the exercise process, the reevaluation process. Now also get plugged into animal disaster organizations in your area. Kansas has the Kansas State Animal Response Team, which is a nonprofit organization that functions on a statewide level. Hopefully you are all already familiar with this organization, if not members of the organization. If there are local affiliates to this state level group, then that state level can let you know who and where they are. And I suspect that Kansas SART also has a link to the Kansas Department of Agriculture so that all of the critical players are in the loop whenever a disaster strikes. Kansas SART also has a pet care industry toolkit with tools specific to your state that will help you to develop a disaster plan. Be active in that process, in that toolkit, and give feedback to the organization about what you find helpful and any recommendations for improvements to the toolkit. Make it a community effort, and it will become better as people utilize it. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about a term called continuity of operations planning, or what is frequently referred to as a COOP. This term is first associated again with President Dwight D. Eisenhower's Presidential Policy Directive, or PPD 40, that was designed to assure that the various departments of the US government would be able to continue operating after a nuclear attack. Technopedia defines continuity of operations planning as part of a principle called continuity of operations that helps to ensure trouble-free operations through unanticipated events. And then finally, the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, which we will introduce you to further here in a minute, defines continuity of operations as an ongoing process to ensure that the necessary steps are taken to identify the impacts of potential losses and maintain viable continuity and recovery strategies and plans. So I want to emphasize the word process, as this is really a program that a business implements. It's not just a plan that's written and put on a shelf. So just as you would implement a cleaning program in your facility or a computer maintenance program in your facility, this is a program that you develop and maintain. All right, so I mentioned the National Fire Protection Association. They publish more than 275 consensus codes and standards that are intended to minimize the possibility and effects of fire and other risks. NFPA codes and standards administered by more than 250 technical committees comprising approximately 9,000 volunteers overall are adopted and used throughout the world. The training that we're going to mention today and just briefly get started with, introduce you to, follows the 2019 NFPA 1600 standard. So these standards are numbered, and the one that we're using is 1600, which looks at, which is a standard on continuity, emergency, and crisis management. If you decide that your business could benefit from a more detailed plan, you may want to consider downloading a copy of this document. You can do so by creating a free account, and then you'll have a specific period of time in which you can download a free copy after you've created that free account. Otherwise, you can just look at the document online, but you can't download it and copy from it and use it that way. In this NFPA 1600, there are 7 components of a continuity of operation plan. And so let's just talk about these different aspects for a minute. So the program management covers who will lead the program, the finances of the program, and managing the records of the program. The planning portion covers risk assessments, impact analysis, and resource needs assessments. The implementation covers the prevention, mitigation, communication, procedures, continuity, and recovery aspects of the plan. The execution phase covers how to recognize an incident, the notification of staff, and how and when to activate the plan. The training and education section covers how to develop a training curriculum, and if your organization is large enough, how to structure an incident management team. And then the exercises and tests covers the most critical aspect of a COOP plan, as I've already mentioned, that of testing and exercising your plan, and evaluating the strong and weak points of the plan. And then finally, the program maintenance and improvement covers taking the information from the evaluation and implementing corrective actions or fixes before the next exercise period. Now, we don't have time to cover these different aspects on today's presentation. I just wanted to introduce you to them. And I'll mention some other possible resources for you to look at to get more information on these different sections later in the presentation. But I did want to spend some time talking about some planning ideas that are specific to animal-related businesses. So here are some examples of processes that you may want to better document and prepare for. I consider these ideas to be the low-hanging fruit, or areas that most animal-related businesses actually need to work on. If you need to evacuate with a very little notice, do you have the means and proper procedures as listed? So do you have appropriate vehicles to move all the animals in your facility in a short period of time? Do you have adequate leashes? Do you have animals ID'd appropriately so that once they're out of their enclosure, they can still be appropriately ID'd? Do you have the needed carriers, blankets, cat litter, litter boxes, food, water, and the bowls to go along with them? What about animal medical records that might be, in a slot somewhere or even attached to the cage? Um, are those Can those be rapidly taken um, and sent with the animals so that you don't lose the association of the medical records and medications and supplies with the animal? These are all things that people don't think about because they don't ever anticipate having to do a rapid evacuation out of their facility. But there can be a lot of reasons for rapid evacuations. We started the presentation with the flooding aspect, but you could have a chemical spill or any number of things that could happen that would require a rapid evacuation out of your facility. Have you identified an alternate site for your facility? It's not uncommon for businesses to lose access to their facility or their home for a period of time. How will you continue your business operations without access to that facility? So include in your planning options for this scenario, do you have friends or colleagues that you could develop an agreement with, a memorandum of understanding or MOU? Some financial compensation may need to be considered, but that might be better than not having any business operations available for a period of time. There may be other options depending on the size of your operations, such as vacant buildings or warehouses for small animals and fairgrounds for large animals that could be utilized for a period of time. And then finally, power disruption is one of the most common issues related to disaster situations. More often than not, power disruptions happen when there's no disaster at all, but a prolonged power disruption in some businesses can turn into a disaster, depending on how long you are without power. So does your operation rely on a cold chain, in other words, refrigeration and freezers? And how long can you go without electricity before running into real problems? So generators are a great investment and typically are in very short supply during a disaster or a wide-reaching power outage. So get one now if you don't already have one. These were some pre-COVID prices for a range of generator sizes, which is given in kilowatts out of output. You can see that for 20 kilowatts, they can run upwards of $5,000. For 30 kilowatts, $10,000. For 150 kilowatt, $30,000. And you can get smaller ones, of course. You can get down to 1 kilowatt or 5 kilowatt generators for for $1,000 or so around there. But decide what you need for power and get something so that you can operate during an outage. These generators can run on gasoline, diesel, propane, natural gas, and a number of other fuel sources. So determine what might work best for you. Generators can run on fuel from a fuel tank or from a constant source of fuel, such as a natural gas line. So look at those considerations and figure out what might work best for you. Generators can be manually started once you notice that the power is out, or bigger ones frequently can be on an auto start, so they automatically start up once power is lost. And then some of these larger generators can be tied into your electrical panel to provide uninterrupted power to select outlets that you have in use that are critical. And then the final low-hanging fruit I want to cover today is water. How long can your facility go without water? You may see small water bottles that are distributed during disasters by response organizations. This is typically how water is dispersed during a disaster. Those small plastic bottles may become very problematic in serving the needs of larger water requirements. Having appropriately sized water storage containers, along with a method of delivery of the water to the locations that you will need, will ease one more major stressor at a critical time. And believe me, stress can be significant during these disasters. Okay, and you can utilize water for a variety of things: drinking, cleaning, hygiene, cooling, such as swamp coolers, things like that that you might need it for. Look at your monthly water bill usage, divide it by the number of days in that billing cycle. That'll tell you how much water you're using on a daily basis, when water is plentiful. Consider then, based on that description, what you can, what your absolute requirements would be, and then determine how many days you would want to be able to have water storage for, and plan on storing that amount of water. And then make sure you're considering the method of water delivery from those storage sources. And hopefully you're not having to pour a small plastic bottle hundreds or thousands of times. I wanted to also leave you today with some other resources that the AVMA provides, that might be helpful for you. So as I mentioned, I was going to talk about some other resources that you could look to that would give you more information about the NFPA 1600 document and all those planning steps that we talked about. AVMA's digital education platform is called Axon. Non-AVMA members can get access to much of the content on the site, and we currently have a slightly more detailed introduction to this topic on the site than what we're able to go through today. The title is Disaster and Business Continuity Planning. That is a more involved introduction to the process than what we are able to cover today. In addition, we are in the process of creating a certificate program for veterinary clinics that will be a 3-module series that gets into the meat of the NFPA 1600 process and provides more details for those that want to go beyond the low-hanging fruit and develop a more robust program. Again, while directed specifically to veterinary clinics, this certificate program will be available to non-AVMA members for a fee, so you'll be able to access that as well. We are actually in the process of recording those right now and anticipate they'll be up within a month or so. The other thing that is very popular, one of our most popular resources, is a pamphlet called Saving the Whole Family, Disaster Preparedness. This 28-page document covers how to include a wide range of animals in your preparedness plans. It includes topics such as animal ID, transportation, medical records, and evacuation kits for all kinds of animals. English and Spanish versions are available for download for free from our AVMA site. And we still have a supply of Spanish version, printed versions that can be ordered. And you only pay for the shipping cost for those Spanish versions. We do not have any English versions currently in print. So they're just available for download. And I think that brings us to the end of my prepared remarks. And I appreciate everyone listening, and would be happy to address any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Dr. Hess, for that wonderful presentation. At this time, we will turn it over to Dana Ladner from KDA. Dana, have there been any questions submitted from our participants?
There have been, Ben, thank you. The questions submitted so far, Dr. Hess, really revolve around that planning process that you have mentioned, more than once with that. So reflecting on that piece of the presentation, what are the top 3 most important items for a business to have on hand in case of a disaster?
Well, if your business is of a significant size, so for example, if you were an animal shelter or some other animal related business that, that's more than just maybe a few dogs, breeding dogs that you might have, one of the most critical things to have is someone who is assigned to be over the planning process, the whole planning. And they need to be somebody who is excited about the topic and who can become knowledgeable about it. And if they're not the head of the organization, hopefully they're not, because most heads of larger animal facilities, have a lot on their plate, and they're not necessarily the ones that should take this on. But somebody should, but they need to have also the backing of whoever is, the chief of the operations, right? They need to have that backing, and there needs to be some financial assets laid out for this planning process. Because if you don't plan, if you don't have a financial backing, then this plan won't work. It is not a cost-free process to go through, but it will save you a tremendous amount of money when a disaster does strike. And I say when because most businesses run into some kind of disaster that strikes, or at least what you could consider a disaster. Whatever whatever it might be. It might not be a storm. It might not, be a man-created event. It could just be a simple accident that could occur. It could be loss of your, loss of your backup data. There could be all kinds of issues that could cause problems for your business. And being prepared for all of those is going to be really important. So I would say out of anything, having somebody over that planning process, and it's, they're responsible to, to the organization as a whole to carry that out, to do the planning, to keep everyone else informed, to help do the training and that sort of thing. So again, this is a process, it's a plan. It's just a written document that you write up, copy from someone else's facility and stick on a shelf, because that won't help you. As I mentioned earlier, you don't pull plans off the shelf during a disaster. You go with what you practiced and what you know.
That is very true, very, very true with that. One of the pieces of the planning slide that you shared, you talked about animal carriers. Is a kennel a must for every pet that is to be evacuated? Or what type of percentage or what does that look like?
Kennels are a must for animals that are being evacuated in general, but in a rapid evacuation, not necessary for all animals. So for example, if we're talking to individual animal owners, then yes, some type of enclosure is critical. Those animals, if you go to a public shelter to be housed because you've been evacuated from your home, you're going to need some kind of an enclosure for that animal, even if normally it doesn't use an enclosure. So we encourage all animal owners to train their animals to be comfortable in an enclosure, because you will need to keep them not, not all the time in an enclosure if you're in a public shelter, but they will need to be there at least part of the time. So, and if they have an enclosure that they're comfortable with, they're accustomed to, and you take that with you, then that can be used and be of great help. There's also more and more human shelters that are becoming shelters where animals can actually stay with the owners in the shelter. So they're called cohabitated shelters, so that you don't have to leave your animal in some other shelter with all the other animals. They can be right with you, and if you have that carrier with you, you'll be able to function much better in that space.
Good. A question came in as follow-up on that. Being that there will be a need for resources, maybe additional equipment to be purchased by the businesses, in this case our licensees, are you aware of any grants that may be available or other funding sources to help out with some of these costs? Because I'm going to bet folks are going to be headed off now. I've had some comments that say, oh my gosh, I know we got part of this, but we need some more of this. So are there places that folks may be able to go to help with some of those costs?
Yeah, there are a number of companies that give out preparedness grants. So you can look for some of the large national rescue organizations that give out grants. Organizations such as the ASPCA and International Fund for Animal Welfare. There's also PetSmart has a charity arm that they give out preparedness grants for. So those would be some of the organizations I would guide you towards. I'd also reach out to your state representatives that are part of the National Alliance of State Animal and Agricultural Emergency Programs. That's a big long name. We call it NASEP. There's probably somebody from the Kansas Department of Agriculture that's associated with that. They'll also have contacts with NASEP and other organizations where some of these potential funding sources can be identified. You'd be surprised how often during a disaster, some of these organizations are searching, trying to find the impacted organizations that have expended money and trying to reimburse them. It can be hard to give away money during a disaster because you can't find the appropriate people to do that. So that would be another role for your Kansas SART as well. They could be a link to some of those sources.
Great, thank you on that. That's a lot of great resources there to be able to reach out to, and I know the folks going on today will appreciate that.
And I'll just mention, Dana, really quick, the American Veterinary Medical Foundation, the charitable arm of the AVMA, also has disaster grants, but they're specifically targeted to veterinarians that are impacted or who are providing care for animals that have been impacted during a disaster.
Thank you. We're all aware that disasters don't necessarily need the time frame of those that help with planning. or other means of it. So we have that continuing operations plan. Okay, we're out of town with it, we're at a conference, something like that. You know, how far in advance does someone pull the trigger to put the next person in line to be able to get things going? We all like to be in charge of things, and if we're in charge of that plan and we're 4 states away, you know, what are some of those suggestions on making sure that a number 2 is comfortable with things and that they're ready to go?
That's a great question. It takes me back to the first NACEP conference I ever went to. So this NACEP organization is really the movers and shakers on a national level for animal disaster response. And I want to say it was probably back in 2008. We were actually at the NACEP conference when a major hurricane hit the Gulf Coast. And it was amazing. We lost about half of our participants in the program because they all had to find flights and head back and start doing their real job. And it's always a tough call as to, do we need to pull this trigger right now or can we wait? I can tell you that getting things in a staged manner, staging things so that you can move from one stage to another, without activating everything all at once is really helpful. And being proactive, anticipating that, yeah, we might not need to go to this level, but it's better to go to this next level now, and be prepared than it is to, hope we don't need it and then end up needing it. I would always take that one step further than just hoping that you don't need it, because if you wait and you do need it, you're not going to be able to catch up.
I agree with that 100% on that. One of those things you just don't know about. We had a question come in from a breeder that has a small operation with it. Are there steps that they can take to help alert emergency workers that there are pets on site during a disaster with it? Or, are there things that can be done ahead of time in case of that, if a business isn't clearly marked or maybe in a rural area? What are some things that private breeders may be able to do to help themselves and their animals during an emergency?
Ultimately, when it comes down to emergencies happening and having that kind of communication that this questioner is looking for, it comes down to relationships. Knowing somebody, having established a pre-existing relationship with an emergency manager or some first responder in your area, so that they know who you are, what your business is, where you're located, how many animals you have. Reach out to those organizations, and don't just reach out once and tell them who you are. Try to go to some of their planning sessions. Give them ideas on things that you think might be helpful for them to know about your business and the animals that you have. You won't always get 100% take on those offers. Sometimes you have to be persistent, depending on who the first responders are or the emergency managers are that you're approaching. If you can approach them with potential solutions rather than just problems, you'll have a much better chance of gaining their initial endorsement or acceptance or excitement. And that would be the most beneficial thing you can do.
Sounds like a great addition to a coop plan to make sure that outreach is done ahead of time.
Yep, that's actually part of the coop process. So,
well, great. We had another question come in during an evacuation. Things are kind of up in the air a lot of the time. Are there things that shelters, pet owners, individuals, etc., specifically can do to make it easier for a pet to adjust to unfamiliar landmarks, smells, the busyness of what's going on? Are there any tips from the veterinarian side of you in your practice, what you do to maybe help out on some of that stress on the animals?
Yeah, so this is a common issue, especially when emergency animal shelters are set up, and trying to keep the animals calm. And what are some things that you can employ there to help out? So obviously, appropriate animal separation, is going to be helpful. Separating dogs from cats or other species, and visual separation can be very, very helpful. So even if you can't separate them, at a distance, they've got to be maybe in the same building or in the same structure or whatever it is. But if you can block their visual connection with one another, that'll go a long way in calming the animals down. If it's possible, keeping the lighting down in the facility will help. And then also, some people have found it very beneficial to play some soothing music that can be piped in if that's possible. And those three things can really help quite a bit. So, for example, in a lot of emergency shelters, what happens is when a cage is set up, they use the box for the cage to surround the cage, so that you've got that visual impairment that's happening from one cage to another.
Great. Talking about separation is a perfect lead into the next question that we have received. How important is microchipping in that registration in case of a disaster?
So great probing question there. Microchipping is essential, as is external readable identification. They both are essential. And obviously microchips don't work if the registration isn't kept up to date. So, and a lot of, it is not uncommon in large animal shelters that are, emergency shelters that are set up, that all animals are microchipped if they don't have one, to help in the identification process and the reunification process and so on. If they've already got one, so much the better.
Great. We've had some super questions come in. If any more of our participants have questions, make sure you put that in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. We'll sure take those. We've got just a few minutes left. Dr. Hess, you talked about the need for water and how to estimate that out. What about food? Is there a good way to estimate how much food that folks should have on hand, not knowing how long a disaster or moving to a new location may be? What's the best guess or information to be put into that coop plan to have on hand?
Yeah, so what we've found is that it can take upwards of 5 to 10 days through to get food sources to a location after a real significant event. So if we're talking coastal storms that can wipe everything out, and including roads and railways and things like that, it can be a good 10 days or more before organizations can get food supplies in to supplement areas that need it. So that might be 10 days might be something to shoot for. Frequently people can't store that much, especially if you've got a lot of animals that you need to take care of. If you're talking to individual animal owners, frequently tell them 5 to 7 days of food would be good to have in their animal evacuation kit.
Great. I appreciate all of your time. We have one final question that has come in before we turn this back over to Ben. But we've talked a lot about the coop plan. So we've got planning on our mind. We've got standard operating procedures to make sure that coop plan is implemented. The disaster event is now wrapping up. Is there anything that needs to be done after the disaster is over? What are those next steps for our shelters, our breeders, those that are on today, those that may listen here off the video later? What are some of those steps post-disaster?
Well, I think one of the things that can be really beneficial is to have some kind of after-action report that is put together, looked at, what went well, what didn't go well. So again, this is that evaluation process that you're looking at, so that you can make the needed changes to avoid some of the pitfalls that you will always find in any significant disaster. You will never avoid all of them because you can't anticipate everything. But you will have lessons learned from every disaster. And so identifying what those were, looking at your own plan, putting those fixes into your plan, and then practicing again. Don't let the only practice that you do be real events. Take the opportunity to practice when lives are not on the line, and learn from those exercises. That'll get you much further along.
Well, great. Dr. Hess, thank you very much for your time. Your presentation was great. The questions that were received from those participating were wonderful and blended right in. So thank you again for your time. With that, Ben, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you for presenting for us today, Dr. Hess, and thank you to all the participants that joined today. The next webinar in our virtual small animal series will be Thursday, June 24th at 12 p.m. with the AFI team. Tyler Power, Program Manager, Dr. Mark Olson, Inspector, Christopher Demmel, Inspector, myself, Inspector, and Michelle Florence, Admin Assistant. Thank you.